What if a prison could become more than a place of punishment? What if it could become a field, a classroom, and a training ground for rebuilding a nation? In Burkina Faso, that idea is beginning to take shape under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore. The government is pursuing a strategy that seeks to use every available national resource in the service of development. That includes land, machinery, young people, farmers, technicians, and even eligible prisoners who are willing to work, learn, and prepare for a different future. Instead of allowing years of confinement to pass in idleness, selected inmates are being introduced to organized agricultural work. They learn how to cultivate crops, manage a production cycle, care for livestock, use basic equipment, and understand the discipline required to produce food on time. The goal is not simply to make them work. The larger goal is to give them skills that can still matter when their sentences end. This changes the meaning of prison reform. The prison is no longer viewed only as a cost to the state. It can also become a place where people learn responsibility, contribute to food production, and prepare to return to their communities with practical knowledge. The idea has attracted attention because Burkina Faso is also pushing a wider agricultural transformation. Tractors, irrigation pumps, improved seeds, fertilizer support, storage facilities, and food processing projects are being connected to a national vision of greater self-reliance. If you value thoughtful stories about Africa and the people working to shape its future, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. In this video, we will examine how the program works, what benefits it may create, what concerns it raises, and why some observers believe Burkina Faso is building a model that other African nations may study closely. This is not only a story about prisoners working on farms. It is a story about justice, food security, national discipline, and the difficult question of whether a person who has made serious mistakes can still be trained to help rebuild the country. Burkina Faso did not arrive at this prison reform by accident. The policy emerged from a broader national challenge. Like many developing countries, Burkina Faso has long faced pressure from limited public resources, rising security concerns, and the urgent need to strengthen its agricultural sector. Every ministry has been expected to contribute to national development, including the justice system. Traditionally, prisons consume public funds without producing measurable economic value. Governments must provide food, housing, healthcare, security, and administration for inmates, while many prisoners spend years with few opportunities to develop practical skills. When their sentences end, many return to society with the same difficulties they had before entering prison, making successful reintegration a constant challenge. The current reform seeks to change that pattern. Instead of viewing incarceration as a period of inactivity, Burkina Faso is experimenting with a system that combines lawful detention with vocational training and productive work. Selected inmates participate in agricultural activities under supervision, learning farming techniques while contributing to food production. Officials argue that meaningful work can encourage discipline, responsibility, and self-confidence, qualities that may help reduce the risk of reoffending after release. The reform also reflects a practical economic calculation. Agriculture remains one of Burkina Faso's most important sectors, employing a large share of the population and playing a central role in food security. Expanding domestic production has become increasingly important as the country seeks to reduce dependence on imported food and strengthen its resilience against economic and security pressures. For the government, connecting prison reform with agriculture creates a single policy capable of addressing multiple objectives at once. It supports vocational education, increases agricultural output, makes better use of available land, and provides inmates with experience that could become valuable after they regain their freedom. Supporters believe this represents a shift away from punishment alone toward rehabilitation through productive activity. They argue that society benefits when former prisoners live with practical skills instead of years of inactivity. Critics, however, emphasize that any such program must remain voluntary where required by law, operate under clear legal safeguards, and fully respect human dignity and internationally recognized labor standards. Whether this approach ultimately succeeds will depend not only on harvest or production figures, but also on transparency, effective management, and the long-term ability to help former inmates build stable lives after prison. Behind every policy are real places where ideas are tested. And in Burkina Faso, those places are no longer limited to government offices. They include prison compounds that are gradually being transformed into centers of agricultural production and vocational training. The government's objective is not to erase the purpose of imprisonment, but to add another dimension to it, giving selected inmates an opportunity to acquire practical skills while contributing to the country's food production. One of the best known examples is the Baporo Prison Agricultural Production Center. Here, inmates work on cultivated land under organized supervision, following schedules that resemble those of professional farming operations. They prepare the soil, plant crops, maintain irrigation where available, remove weeds, and participate in harvesting. Rather than performing isolated tasks, they are introduced to the complete agricultural cycle, allowing them to understand how food moves from the field to the market. Other correctional facilities have adopted similar approaches on a smaller scale. At Dogo Prison, a limited number of inmates cultivate farmland and participate in crop production, demonstrating that even modest programs can generate meaningful harvests. At Gawa Prison, agricultural activities focus primarily on staple crops that contribute to local food supplies, while giving participants experience in teamwork and responsibility. The training extends beyond physical labor. Participants are expected to follow schedules, respect safety procedures, care for equipment, and work collectively toward production targets. These routines mirror many of the expectations they may encounter after release, helping them develop habits that employers often value, including punctuality, cooperation, and accountability. Officials also emphasize that agriculture provides transferable knowledge. A former inmate returning to a rural community may already possess experience in planting, harvesting, irrigation, soil preparation, or livestock management. Those skills can become a foundation for self-employment or future work in a sector that remains central to Burkina Faso's economy. The success of these facilities is measured by more than the amount of grain produced. Supporters argue that the real harvest lies in changing attitudes. Every season spent learning instead of remaining idle represents an opportunity to replace hopelessness with purpose. If that transformation continues after release, the impact could extend far beyond prison walls, benefiting families, communities, and the nation itself. If prison reform is expected to succeed over the long term, it must deliver more than inspiring headlines. It must also create measurable economic value. That is one of the key reasons Burkina Faso has connected its prison reform program with agricultural production. The goal is to transform correctional facilities into places where rehabilitation and economic development can support one another. One immediate benefit comes from food production. Crops grown on prison farms can help supply correctional facilities with staple foods, reducing part of the government's operating costs. While prison, agriculture alone cannot solve the country's food security challenges. Every successful harvest contributes to greater domestic production and makes better use of available land. The second benefit is vocational training. Agriculture remains one of Burkina Faso's most important industries, employing a large share of the population. By learning practical farming skills, inmates gain experience that may help them earn an honest living after their release. Training in soil preparation, planting, irrigation, harvesting, and Basic equipment handling provides knowledge that is directly relevant to many rural communities. The program also supports a broader agricultural value chain. Growing crops is only the first step. Food must be stored, transported, processed, and eventually sold. As Burkina Faso continues investing in agricultural infrastructure, production from correctional centers can become part of a larger effort to strengthen the national economy and improve food security. Supporters argue that the greatest economic return may come after inmates leave prison. A person who returns home with practical skills has a better chance of finding work, supporting a family, and avoiding future criminal activity. Successful reintegration benefits not only former prisoners, but also their communities and the country as a whole. Even so, long-term success cannot be measured by harvest alone. Effective management, transparency, proper training, and respect for legal and human rights standards remain essential. If these conditions are maintained, Burkina Faso's prison farming initiative could demonstrate that rehabilitation and economic development are not separate goals. Instead, they can work together to create opportunities, strengthen communities, and contribute to the nation's long-term growth. Captain Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly argued that agriculture is the foundation of Burkina Faso's economic independence. For decades, the country has depended heavily on rain-fed farming while facing frequent droughts, limited agricultural equipment, and rising food insecurity. Increasing domestic production has therefore become one of the government's highest priorities. Rather than focusing on a single project, the administration has launched a broader strategy that combines mechanization, improved farming methods, and stronger local production. One visible part of this strategy has been the distribution of tractors, power tillers, irrigation pumps, improved seeds, and fertilizer to farming communities across the country. The objective is simple but ambitious: help farmers cultivate more land, increase crop yields, and reduce dependence on imported food. Officials believe that greater agricultural productivity will strengthen both rural incomes and national food security. Prison farms fit naturally into this wider plan. Instead of operating as isolated institutions, participating correctional facilities contribute to the same national objective of increasing agricultural output. Inmates learn many of the same techniques promoted throughout the country's farming sector, including soil preparation, crop management, irrigation practices, and responsible use of agricultural equipment. The knowledge they acquire may remain valuable long after they complete their sentences. Supporters describe this approach as an investment in both people and production. Every hectare cultivated, every harvest completed, and every new skill learned represents progress toward building stronger rural communities. Rather than treating prison labor and agricultural development as unrelated policies, the government has combined them into a single vision aimed at creating long-term national resilience. Challenges certainly remain: expanding irrigation systems, maintaining modern equipment, financing agricultural infrastructure, and adapting to changing weather conditions all require continued investment. Success also depends on proper management and equal access to training opportunities. Even so, Burkina Faso's strategy reflects a broader belief that lasting development begins with making full use of a country's own resources. Land, knowledge, technology, and human potential are all viewed as assets capable of driving growth. Within that larger national effort, prison agriculture becomes more than a correctional program. It becomes one small but meaningful contribution to a wider campaign for food, security, economic self-reliance, and sustainable development. A nation's strength is measured not only by its natural resources, but also by how effectively it develops its people. This idea appears to be at the heart of Burkina Faso's prison reform strategy. Rather than treating correctional facilities as isolated institutions, the government is attempting to integrate them into a broader national development plan. The objective is to ensure that every public institution contributes in its own way to the country's long-term progress. For many years, prisons were viewed primarily as places of confinement. Their purpose was to protect society by separating offenders from the public while they served their sentences. The new approach does not reject that responsibility, but it expands it. Supporters argue that incarceration should also provide opportunities for education, vocational training, and personal development so that former inmates have a better chance of rebuilding their lives after release. Agriculture provides a practical pathway toward that goal. Many participants come from rural communities where farming is already familiar. By receiving structured training, they can improve existing knowledge while learning modern cultivation methods, equipment handling, and production planning. These skills may help them return to their villages with greater confidence and improved employment prospects. The strategy also reflects a broader philosophy of national self-reliance. Every productive hectare, every trained worker, and every a successful harvest is viewed as a contribution to the country's economic resilience. Instead of allowing valuable land and human potential to remain underused, Burkina Faso is seeking ways to transform both into productive assets that support national development. Supporters believe this approach creates benefits that extend beyond correctional facilities. Families may welcome home relatives who possess practical skills and renewed purpose. Rural communities may gain workers who are better prepared to contribute to local agriculture. At the national level, even modest increases in food production can strengthen long-term food security when combined with broader agricultural reforms. Of course, these ambitions depend on careful implementation. Effective supervision, quality vocational instruction, transparent management, and respect for legal safeguards remain essential to maintaining public confidence. If those standards continue to be upheld, Burkina Faso's prison reform may ultimately demonstrate that rehabilitation is not only about serving a sentence, it is also about preparing individuals to participate constructively in rebuilding their communities and contributing to the nation's future. Every major reform brings debate, and Burkina Faso's prison farming initiative is no exception. While many people see the program as an innovative way to combine rehabilitation with economic development, others argue that it must be examined carefully to ensure that human rights and legal protections remain fully respected. The discussion extends far beyond Burkina Faso, touching on broader international questions about prison, labor, and criminal justice. Supporters point out that productive work has long been part of correctional systems in many countries. When properly managed, vocational programs can teach valuable skills, improve discipline, and prepare inmates for life after release. They argue that meaningful work helps replace long periods of inactivity with opportunities for personal growth, making successful reintegration into society more likely. Critics, however, stress that prison labor must never become a source of exploitation. International labor standards emphasize that work performed by inmates should take place under lawful conditions with appropriate supervision, safety protections, and respect for human dignity. Participation should comply with national laws and applicable international obligations, ensuring that rehabilitation remains the primary objective rather than economic gain alone. Transparency is another important issue. Independent oversight, clear regulations, and public accountability help build confidence that correctional programs operate fairly. When governments openly explain how prison work is organized, how participants are selected, and how training benefits inmates, public trust becomes easier to maintain. For Burkina Faso, balancing these different perspectives will be essential as the program develops. Success will depend not only on higher agricultural production, but also on maintaining ethical standards throughout implementation. A rehabilitation program that earns public confidence is far more likely to achieve lasting results than one surrounded by uncertainty or controversy. Ultimately, the debate highlights an important reality. Prison reform is not simply about producing food or reducing public costs. It is about finding responsible ways to prepare individuals for a better future while protecting their rights throughout the process. If Burkina Faso continues to combine vocational training with transparency, legal safeguards, and respect for human dignity, its experience may provide valuable lessons for other countries exploring similar approaches to rehabilitation and national development. Beyond the economic and legal debates, Burkina Faso's prison reform has attracted attention because it reflects a broader political vision shared by several governments in the Sahel. In recent years, leaders in countries such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have emphasized the importance of self-reliance, stronger regional cooperation, and reducing dependence on external assistance. Agriculture has become one of the clearest areas where that vision can be put into practice. Supporters argue that true national independence is not measured only by political decisions. It also depends on a country's ability to feed its own people, develop local industries, and create opportunities for its citizens. From this perspective, prison farming represents only one small element within a much larger strategy aimed at strengthening domestic production and making better use of available resources. The initiative also reflects a practical understanding of Africa's demographic and economic realities. Across much of the continent, agriculture continues to employ millions of people and remains essential to rural livelihoods. Investments in farming, irrigation, vocational, education, and food processing are therefore seen not only as economic policies, but also as tools for reducing poverty and improving long-term stability. Some observers have compared Burkina Faso's emphasis on national development with the ideas promoted by former President Thomas Sankara, who encouraged agricultural self-sufficiency and greater confidence African solutions to African challenges. While today's political circumstances are different, supporters believe that strengthening local production remains an important objective for the country's future. At the same time, experts caution that no single policy can transform a nation on its own. Lasting progress depends on continued investment, effective governance, transparent institutions, and peaceful conditions that allow development projects to succeed. Prison reform, agricultural modernization, education, and infrastructure must all work together if broader national goals are to be achieved. Whether Burkina Faso's model ultimately becomes an example for other African countries remains uncertain. However, the initiative has already encouraged wider discussion about how correctional systems, vocational training, and agricultural development can be connected in new ways. Regardless of differing opinions, the program has opened an important conversation about how nations can rethink existing institutions to support both rehabilitation and long-term economic resilience. Looking ahead, the long-term significance of Burkina Faso's prison reform may not be measured solely by the number of hectares cultivated or tons of grain harvested. Its greatest impact could lie in the questions it raises for other African nations. Can correctional systems become places of learning instead of prolonged inactivity? Can vocational training inside prisons contribute to national development while helping former inmates build more stable futures? These are questions that policymakers across the continent may increasingly consider. Several countries in Africa face similar challenges: growing populations, limited employment opportunities, pressure on public finances, and the need to strengthen food security require governments to think creatively. Traditional approaches alone may no longer be enough. Programs that combine education, vocational training, and productive work are receiving greater attention because they attempt to address multiple challenges at the same time. Burkina Faso's experience also highlights the importance of adapting reforms to local conditions. What works in one country may not automatically succeed in another. Climate, agricultural resources, legal systems, available funding, and public attitudes all influence the outcome of national policies. Any government interested in similar reforms would need to design programs that reflect its own economic realities and legal framework. Equally important is maintaining public trust. Citizens are more likely to support innovative policies when governments communicate their objectives clearly, publish measurable results, and demonstrate that rehabilitation programs operate fairly and transparently. Confidence grows when reforms produce visible improvements for both participants and society as a whole. The broader lesson extends beyond prison reform itself. Sustainable development rarely depends on a single initiative. It is built through many connected efforts, including education, agriculture, infrastructure, healthcare, justice, and good governance. When these sectors reinforce one another, they create stronger foundations for long-term economic growth and social stability. Whether Burkina Faso's model eventually inspires similar initiatives elsewhere remains to be seen, yet it has already demonstrated the value of challenging conventional thinking. By asking how existing institutions can contribute more effectively to national development, the country has opened an important conversation about innovation, rehabilitation, and self-reliance. For many observers, that conversation may prove just as significant as the harvests themselves. As Burkina Faso continues to expand its prison reform and agricultural development strategies, the world will be watching closely to see what results emerge over the coming years. No single policy can solve every challenge facing a nation, and this initiative should not be viewed as a complete solution. Its long-term success will depend on effective management, transparency, respect for human dignity, and the ability to help former inmates build productive lives after their release. What makes this story remarkable is not simply that prisoners are working on farms. Similar programs have existed in different forms around the world. What makes Burkina Faso's approach different is the way it connects prison reform with a broader national vision. Instead of treating rehabilitation, agriculture, economic development, and food security as separate issues, the government is attempting to bring them together under a single strategy aimed at strengthening the country's future. Whether this model ultimately succeeds or not, it has already sparked an important conversation across Africa and beyond. It challenges governments to reconsider how correctional systems can contribute to society while remaining faithful to the principles of justice, accountability, and human rights. It also reminds us that sustainable development is often built by improving existing institutions rather than creating entirely new ones. The future of Burkina Faso will depend on many factors, including security, education, infrastructure, investment, and continued agricultural progress. Prison reform is only one chapter in that much larger story. Yet, it demonstrates how governments are searching for practical ways to transform challenges into opportunities and to make better use of the resources already available. What do you think? Could a rehabilitation system built around vocational training and agriculture become a model for other nations? Or should each country develop its own unique approach? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is an important part of this conversation. If you enjoyed this analysis, please subscribe to the channel and join us for more in-depth stories about African news, the African Union, Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, Assimi Goïta, Abdourahmane Tiani, France, Mali, Niger, West Africa, and the Sahel. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next documentary. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos